Hey guys, Gareth here from Intent Architect, recording this from Tallinn in Estonia today. In this video, I'm going to take you through the latest release of Intent Architect version 5.2. But before we dive in, I think it's worth quickly just touching on how things have progressed since our last video, simply because the picture we're seeing around agentic development has shifted quite a bit in just the last 2 months. And the trend we're seeing is that many teams aren't just using AI to assist and accelerate their coding tasks. Many have gone fully agentic with their development, where the developers aren't writing any of the code themselves anymore, or at least very, very little. And this is certainly true for our team. With this, we're also seeing the rise of spec-driven development becoming more mainstream. And we're also seeing that this shift is highlighting the severity of the downstream bottlenecks like the validation, review time, PRs, governance, traceability, etc. And because developers are no longer working directly in their code bases, for many teams, these code bases are increasingly becoming black boxes where their understanding of the code bases has been decreasing substantially. And this is raising real questions around the quality, the cognitive debt, and the sustainability of this new approach, especially on the mission critical systems that the many businesses rely on. These are exactly the challenges that this 5.2 release is built to address, essentially giving teams a reliable set of guardrails and better control mechanisms for their agentic development so that they can sustain this AI driven velocity without compromising on quality and governance, etc. I also think it's just quickly worth mentioning that the 5.2 features will add value to your team's workflow, whether you're following an agentic flow or not at all. And on that note, there is a lot to get through, so let's dive right in. Right. So to kick this off, I'm going to open up an existing application that we've built previously with Intent Architect using spec-driven development, and I'll show you guys exactly how we did that a little bit later on. But right out the gates, you guys will see here that there are quite a few changes that, from a UI perspective, that are very clearly visible that are different in version 5.2 to the previous releases of Intent Architect. So I'm going to take you guys through these. Let's just start by minimizing myself here to give us a bit more real estate. And we can see at the top here that the toolbar now has access to our terminals, access to controlling the software factory execution, the tasks, and so on and so forth, opening up the IDE. This, by the way, the application that is focused is the one that we have focused in our main tab. So whichever tab we have focused, that will be what drives the application that is the software factory application that is currently active. We can, of course, kick off other software factories. We can also do that from here, as you guys probably know from previous versions. And I'm going to show you guys how this all tees together over here. And to do this, I'm going to give a very simple instruction to Claude Code Sonnet to go and add some fields to our customer, or to at least add the address to the customer and some operations, some rich domain operations to the customer too. So let's just give it a minute to get started. Now, while it's busy with that, there are a few things that I could just mention about version 5.2 that are quite significant. So the first is that this particular version of Intent Architect is the first version of Intent Architect that we, as the team that builds this platform, use almost exclusively for the development of Intent Architect. So we're using the platform itself to build itself. And this is, of course, very, very interesting and is a huge milestone for us, because we are not reliant on Intent Architect software factory deterministic systems to get value out of the platform. We're able to leverage all of the features that I'll take you guys through as part of this video today. We're able to leverage that in areas of development that are fully agentic. All the code is being written by the LLMs in areas of Intent Architect that we do not have deterministic automation and guardrails, right? So there we're, of course, using other systems and means and doing a hell of a lot of the validation ourselves to ensure that everything is being built properly. But that this is a possibility that is available to us in this version of Intent Architect, and something that is quite a massive milestone. We are using the platform to build itself, which is very, very key. All right, so we can see here, by the way, that it's gone and added in this relationship as well as these operations over here. We can just ask it, I think it's just basically going from a modeling perspective, so we can just ask it to implement this, implement these operations. The steering usually would have him do that, but of course he's an LLM, and it's not always clear exactly how he will interpret our instructions. So let's just give him a minute to go ahead and do that. Now you can see it's running the software factory, and what you can see here is if we want to go and see the changes that are coming in, we've got a unified view of our software factory changes. So with the software factories in the past being in dialogues, we've done away completely with the dialogues in this version of Intent Architect. We now have these aggregated views over here of all the different changes in the system. So this is the software factory changes. These are all of the different code bases that are accessible in the system, all of the different deviations in the system, and of course, across source control. And then we've got this final option over here, which I'll take you guys through in a bit more detail in a minute, which is our specifications. Right, so we can see the changes that came in as part of this. By the way, it just applied those very, very quickly. So we can click on the custom over here. We can see what it applied. And we can also see over here, by the way, that a sub-agent, a coding sub-agent has been dispatched that will go and implement these methods for us in a minute. So the software factory the flow is exactly the same flow that we had in 5.1, but you can see that there is no additional user touch point. This can all flow quite seamlessly from the beginning of the execution all the way through to the end. If we ask the LLM to build us a part of the system, it will go and build out that whole part of the system if that is what we've asked it to go ahead and do, right? This is also, by the way, the same experience that developers and teams would have with our MCP. So to use Intent Architect for most agentic flow, so if we're using Claude Code over here, this is essentially running through the MCP. It's the ACP connected to Claude Code under the hood, which is using the MCP to drive Intent Architect. So whether you're doing your agentic development inside of Intent Architect or outside of Intent Architect, it ultimately is all getting driven through the MCP, and our MCP is awesome. It's super fast. It's very, very good at designing in the models and so on and so forth, and doing that in a very token efficient way. And as you guys can imagine, we get to save a huge amount of output tokens that would have typically had to be spent on generating code directly through the software factory. But the real value add is in the guardrails and the authoritative design specification. So simply plugging the MCP into our agentic flow, we get this huge value add of guardrails and authoritative design specifications, as well as all of the other things that I'm going to show you guys in a few minutes that are now available in this version of Intent Architect. So we can see that it's gone and brought in the code over here. You probably were just watching along. It's gone and added this code in. These changes have now been applied. This is all through the software factory changes. If we head over to our Git, we can see all of those changes over here. And one thing I could just point out is if I click on this button over here, this is going to take me to what we call the changes review tab, right? And this changes review tab is very, very interesting because it gives us a window into the changes that have just happened as part of, for example, the changes that are being dropped right now, but also into historical Git commits. And I'll show you guys in a minute how that all works. And we can see exactly what has actually changed. So the first thing is we've got some stats at the top over here. This is really a very key part of addressing a lot of the work that we have to do in validating the downstream validation of changes coming into our code base. So the big problem that a lot of teams are facing is really around what has actually changed in the system. I've got 20 files, 50 files that are coming in through this PR. What has actually changed? What is actually different in the system? And I want to be able to see this historically at any moment in time. As we spoke about earlier, our code bases are more and more becoming black boxes. The structure and what's actually happening in the design of the system is getting lost. It's the cognitive debt that's building up for teams across the board where they're going fully agentic. Now, what we can see here in this is we've got some needs attention. It's really just the customer itself. If we click on that, we can see why. It's really just brought in this field and our different changes over here. But everything else in this commit, all of the other code, is not being listed over here, right? So we've got 72 lines of code. It's not a big change, but we only really need to just check on this particular file. And we also have a view over here of the changes to our domain. We can see that it added the address and these operations. And if we click on this, it's going to take us to the model-centric diff of this. So this is against the head to the working tree. It's a model-centric diff showing us I added this relationship and I added those different operations over there. But of course, this is just for what's getting dropped as part of this commit. So if we want, we can create a comment over here and we can go and we can commit this into our source control, which is all fine. But maybe we're very curious about what happened a little bit downstream. So for example, on this commit over here, which is adding payments, I may be curious about reviewing the changes in this commit. And if I take a look at these changes over here, you guys will see that there is a little bit more going on. So we can see that there were some changes to the domain. It's very hard to necessarily understand exactly what all of this is, but if we take a look at it through the model-centric diffs, we can see here that what it did was it added payments, payment details, and an operation to this. Also not a dramatic change, but we also added some services over here, so we can see that there was some security and a payment command that was created. If we click on this, it's going to take us to that to that change over here. So here we can see the change. It looks like it didn't add this necessarily to the model. It was just added this particular change over here, and we can see what this change is, right? So we can see that I made this change when I did this change, and essentially it was me adding this element as part of that commit. So you can see there that this model-centric diff is a diff between two commits. We can do this across any point in the system. So if we're curious about what changed, for example, since this, let's go rather to this commit over here. Say since this commit, what has actually changed? It can show us, well, all of this stuff has actually changed over here, right? Now we've got 20,000 lines of code that have actually come in since those changes came in. And we can go through these and we can see the model-centric diffs throughout the system. So in the domain, as we saw just a minute ago, we can see exactly what got brought in. There's our customer. There's some additional information that got added to the order. And so we can see very, very easily exactly what changed in our system. And so this is giving us that visibility and that retrospective view on how our system is evolving or has evolved since a certain point in time, or between, for example, two different commits. So if we are clicking on two different commits, we could just ask it to, let me just select that commit, that commit and that commit, and we can say review between these two commits, and it'll show us these are the changes that happen between those two commits. So some front-end related work, some back-end related work, and then we've got all the files that we actually needed to review. So as I mentioned earlier, the only files that we ultimately need to review between changes are files where the LLM has essentially played a role or the developer has played a role, right? And so what you'll notice here is the bar at the top is showing us that right now there is 85% of the changes that happened between these two commits are in fact fully deterministic. Because they're fully deterministic, we don't need to check that code. All of that code is completely, we know that is conforming 100% to the architecture. The only thing we may be curious about is how did the design of our system evolve, right? And that we'll check, for example, through these changes or by clicking on and getting the model-centric diffs. But the changes that we may be interested in is, for example, what happened in the program file over here. We can see that it made some changes, and we can go through all of these individual changes. These are deterministic files that have some custom code inside of them. So this is essentially a place where this file is managed by Intent Architect, but there is some custom code that's been brought in. And then for files that are not managed at all by Intent Architect, we do track those now in version 5.2. So we can tell you the following files were added outside of Intent Architect's control. And these files they're obviously very, very necessary in most cases, but we'll flag those for the user, for the developers, so that they can see exactly what got brought in, and we can track those too. So those would be the two types of files that we would see under our needs attention panel over here. So it will basically, if anything is not approved, it will indicate that it needs attention. We can then go view it. We can take a look at what the change is, and we can tell it, I'd like to approve that change or approve all of the different changes. And once all are approved, it will flag this in green and just say everything is fine. The other things that you guys will notice here is that we're also listing out the specifications that were involved in, or at least got touched as part of the changes that happened between those commits. And if we expand these, we can see the different requirements that were there. If I click on these, it'll take me to that particular requirement. So we can click around the system and understand what are these requirements very, very easily. I'll show you guys exactly where that connects in a minute, because that's all under our specs over here. And we can see the changes that came in as part of this requirement. So here we can see that there were some changes to the program file and so on and so forth, all as part of the authentication and account access that came in as part of the Blazor front end. Right, so we've got that traceability. You'll also notice that traceability will be listed under these changes over here. So if something has been linked to a requirement, it'll flag it for us over here, and we can see exactly what this change was related to from a spec perspective. And that is there to answer the question that teams are going to have and have at this point in time. When we come across a certain field or a certain file or something in the system, we oftentimes have a question around where did this come from and why is this here? Right. And this traceability system between our specifications and the work done within our system is something that 5.2 brings to the table for us and is there to historically answer this question for us at any moment in time, whenever we need that answer. Right. So we can go through our systems and we could say what actually changed, looking back at this one over here, what actually changed, what caused these changes? It was this particular requirement. We can click on that requirement and we can understand that it was a capture of a manual payment for an order. This was the user story. These were the different acceptance criteria that was put forward as part of this particular specification. Which brings me into the specifications panel. So what we've built inside of Intent Architect is we've built a specification system. It's just a built-in specification system in Intent Architect. It follows a very simple specification structure, which really aligns with what we see most of the different specification systems providing. So it's either PRD or a requirements document. You've got a design or a plan or an architecture document, and then you've got your user stories or your tasks or whatever the equivalent is of a tasks document. And we can click on any of these and we can see the different requirements. We can see the different design. This is, of course, if we want to edit these, we can just switch over to the markdown view of this. You could just use the Control-Shift-V shortcut like you would in any editor. And so we can see all the different tasks that have been completed, the different waves in which they were executed, and so on and so forth. And so this is a built-in spec-driven development system. And one thing that I think is worth just mentioning is that teams that are already using spec-driven development systems like, for example, BMAD or OpenSpec or Kiro, those are perfectly fine. You can keep using those. It's not a requirement to use this built-in version of the spec management systems. One thing that we are planning to do is, as you can see over here, we've got some basic import support for some of the existing systems. This is something that we'll be expanding on so that we can bring the traceability, for example, into the BMAD executions so that you can have full traceability of the changes in your system that was happening as part of BMAD spec executions and the agentic work that happened as part of building out and meeting those requirements in those specifications. Right. So this is something that is currently in beta. We are getting ourselves a lot of value from this. We're really enjoying this approach. Definitely recommend you guys give it a try and see how you find it, and please give us feedback and tell us how we can improve. There is a lot of work that we plan to constantly be improving this system over here and making it compatible with the state-of-the-art leaders in the spec-driven space. There is a very strong overlap between the different ways that different spec-driven development frameworks are working, and so we see ourselves being able to leverage that very, very well and create the traceability, which is really, as I mentioned, the major question that I think everybody is going to be asking downstream. And so you guys can see how 5.2 connects all of these together. We've got our review changes systems. So we can see here the different review changes that we're going through. And one thing I could just mention is that we are also seeing, we have a really, really awesome roadmap for features that we can see ourselves bringing in here. Because when it comes to validation and verification of systems, we see that there is a huge gap and a need for us to collapse the amount of verification that needs to happen for us to know that we're in control in our system. So just by bringing Intent Architect in, we get the guardrails, we get the control, we get the structure, we get the authoritative design specifications, and all of those things, just by bringing in that MCP as part of the agentic development part of the SDLC. But this gives us the view for the downstream of that where we need to do the verification, and it gives us a view into this which can help us verify very, very quickly that the direction that the LLM is taking for the commits or commits that are coming in or PRs is in fact in the right direction. And so you guys can anticipate in future versions and releases of Intent Architect that the functionality here is going to evolve and become better and better and better. Right, guys, so that's just to give you a bit of a feel and a very, very broad overview of what's new in version 5.2. I hope you guys enjoy the new features and very, very keen to get you guys' feedback. Please let us know how we can improve. And until the next one, wishing you guys all the best. Cheers.